Just days after one of the world's biggest earthquakes hit Tokyo, the stoicism of this city's people might fool you into thinking nothing had happened. But calm belies the frightening truth of a country grappling with the prospect of a nuclear catastrophe.
Clearly, Mother Nature has outwitted all of our best resources, our best engineers, our best systems, our best technological society. We've just been flummoxed by Mother Nature.
The Japanese Prime Minister says his country is facing its greatest crisis since the Second World War.
And now, tonight, the crisis has taken yet another turn.
We are getting reports of partial meltdowns in 2 of those reactors.
If ever evidence were needed of the violent and unstoppable force nature can produce, it was presented last week in Japan. This is the city of Sendai on the eastern coast, where the crushing tsunami wave wreaked havoc, destroying everything in its path, including its new state-of-the-art airport.
I'm going to call you back in maybe a couple hours.
Kit Miyamoto is one of the world's most renowned experts in engineering for disaster zones. He's come to Sendai to assess the structural damage and to see what lessons he can learn from the destruction. He's returning to this part of his country for the first time in 30 years.
Kit, you're a scientist, but just on an emotional level, what's your reaction to what we're seeing out of the window here?
Well, it's I don't know, this area, you know, I was here when I was like 17, about 30 years ago. And actually, this is actually maybe the road. It's just that amazing. I mean, those cars, you know, just, they're washed out from somewhere else, obviously. This must be went through pretty good, though. I mean, look, those cars, it's not like somebody moved there. It's actually carried by the water to this point, and it stops there. But these cars may be washed out from one of the parking lot or something like that in nature, you know.
More than 4,000 people are now known to have died when the tsunami hit Japan's eastern coast. That number rises every day. Exactly how nature deals these devastating blows and how we might overcome them are questions scientists are working tirelessly to answer. The task begins with our understanding of the vast tectonic plates which form the surface of the Earth.
In Japan, the Pacific plate is diving down underneath Japan and is pushing Japan up. And it moves probably about 80 millimeters or so a year on average. And as the Pacific plate dives down underneath, it sort of bends the Japanese plate in that kind of way, and eventually the friction between the two rock surfaces is overcome. There's so much stress and strain there that the fault breaks and the Pacific plate dives down underneath a bit further and the Japanese plate flips up to relieve the stress. And it's that flipping up that actually triggers the tsunami, because it's flicking up the bottom of the ocean and raising the sea.
In the worst affected areas, towns were hit by a wave which was 10 meters high. The ground-shaking tremors would have provided some warning before the force of the water hit land. But the speed of the tsunami has left many asking whether anything could have been done to save lives.
Large tsunamis are a force of nature that are extremely difficult to withstand.
Dr. Tiziana Rossetto is a leading researcher in damage limitation and sustaining life during earthquakes.
Small tsunamis, I think we could design against with, say, coastal barriers or through even urban planning, so that land use near the coastline is controlled, so that people aren't put at risk. However, large tsunamis are enormous, create enormous forces on buildings that really can't be designed against unless a lot of investment is put in.
Because you can see the marking in the buildings.
Dealing with that problem is Kit Miyamoto's job. He was an advisor to the United Nations on how best to rebuild Haiti, so has witnessed far greater human loss. But this is his homeland, and the consequences of this disaster have hit him particularly hard.
The engineers, I let society down in a way, if you think about it, you know. And yeah, those seawalls are designed for a certain standard, but obviously it's not good enough for this 7-meter high waves. And well, could it be 10-meter wall? Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something need to be think through like that. But also, certain areas maybe not be able to occupy by a human being in a sense, you know? So
well, we have to leave some land to nature.
I think reconstruction, something like that, combination of the certain area, we have to probably surrender to the nature in a sense, but certain area have the better protection system to able to you know, occupy it, and because there are ways to do that, but obviously the balance of it, because no one want to live surrounded by 20-meter high the concrete walls. You don't be living in jails either. So it's definitely the balance of between of the surrender to nature for certain area, and also a combination of using the high technology to be able to occupy it.
200 miles south of Sendai, the capital city, Tokyo, was spared the tsunami. But this was the most powerful earthquake in Japanese history, so the city was violently shaken. And yet, in a metropolis of more than 35 million people, incredibly, only 4 were killed in the quake.
It is remarkable that the hundreds of thousands of buildings in Tokyo have survived unscathed. But I think the experience in Japan has been hard-won. The Great Kanto earthquake in 1923 killed over 100,000 people and caused enormous devastation to the city. And that proved to be, in some ways, a turning point. So obviously in Tokyo now you see very few brick or masonry buildings. Structural materials need to be more elastic, be less brittle. So steel, reinforced concrete, timber, those materials are essential.
The earthquake that struck Japan was 100 times more powerful than the one which devastated Haiti 1 year ago. And while terrifying for the office workers caught inside the high-rise buildings in Tokyo, structurally there was little damage. This was due to the stringent codes that require all buildings to be quake-proof.
Appearances can be deceptive. Sometimes buildings which are very heavy and have a lot of walls or a lot of columns, a lot of thick slabs, are not very good in earthquakes. And in fact, it's very, very important to keep the weight as light as you can when you're designing a building in an earthquake region.
Japan has invested billions preparing for the superquake, and there's no question that that money saved lives last week.
Very much.
Ross and Julie Macken, who are from Bedford, moved to Tokyo with their 2 children last year. I met them 2 days after the earthquake hit. Julie works in the heart of the city and has become, like her Japanese colleagues, used to earthquakes.
My office is on the 18th floor of a 30-storey building, and we've had a couple of quakes there since I've been there, one being on Wednesday, quite a big one on Wednesday, and the building started shaking, and I was like, oh, I think we're having an earthquake, and my colleague's like, yeah, that's fine, and then it carried on going and got bigger and bigger, and my colleagues were not panicking at all, but I started to get actually quite scared. And when I looked across the office and I could see some of the women actually getting scared and starting to get their hats, I then started to really panic, and my colleague went, get under the desk. And I was sitting, just as I was moving under the desk, I could see the drawers started to come in and out, the chairs are moving around the floor. And it was when I looked out of the window and I could see the other skyscraper going like that next door, I just started to panic.
Choosing to build a capital city, Tokyo, a skyscraper metropolis, right next to one of the Earth's most active fault lines, came with a heavy price tag. To date, the Japanese have spent more on earthquake research, design and technology than any other country.
And when I was up there, I could see this building here going past the window like this, which was a bit freaky. And then we came downstairs and we stood out here, and that building over there and this building are both wobbling together like blades of grass, and that one just looked like it couldn't stand up anymore. It did look like it was going to tumble, but it's still there.
Small, thin-looking...
The small, thin and sort of fragile glass-looking building. So, you know, all credit to the Japanese engineers. They must have done something right.
This footage was filmed as the earthquake hit last Friday afternoon. These images show you the flexibility which is built into the skyscrapers. Look at the black building in the middle, swaying back and forth.
I'm sitting in the sky above Tokyo on the 28th floor of a 30-year-old building which last year had some major improvement work done. There are now 12 of these V-shaped steel brackets on every floor, each connected to its own shock absorber, and together they form an enormous flexible skeleton which enables the building to not only scrape the sky but move with the earth.
The world's top engineers are constantly working on designs for skyscrapers. New techniques aim to keep the buildings as strong as possible. These pendulums can be found at the top of a skyscraper. They work against the force of an earthquake. And these special columns are one of the latest developments in the effort to make skyscrapers earthquake-proof. Take some normal concrete, wrap a skin of steel around it, and you have concrete-filled tubes that are far more robust. And these oil dampers work by absorbing the shaking of the building in the same way that shock absorbers work in a car. But state-of-the-art design isn't the only weapon in Japan's armoury when it comes to taking on Mother Nature. A lot of work is done here on public awareness of what to do in the event of a quake. And it starts at an early age.
I guess we do look a bit silly right now, but this is what you have to do, isn't it?
Well, you get used to it, like you're on a boat just wobbling, but the big one was pretty scary.
For the Macan children, earthquakes are becoming part of their routine. On the internet, the family are following the aftershocks and the stories emerging of explosions at one of Japan's nuclear power plants. The latest news there is worrying.
The concern now is with the nuclear power plants. So we're getting pictures of explosions at nuclear power plants and all sorts of different views on whether it's safe, not safe, is there going to be a problem, is there not going to be a problem.
That is the scary thing. The aftershocks are fine because, you know, you felt a few this morning. They're fairly minimal and we're used to that. The tsunami's not going to affect us here, but it's that nuclear power plant that's a bit scary.
What do you think you will do?
Stay here, I expect.
Yeah, I think we should look at some flights. I don't know. It's impossible to know.
The developing story of the damage caused to the nuclear power plant in Fukushima was an unexpected consequence of nature's assault on Japan this week. The earthquake triggered the tsunami, and the tsunami struck at the heart of the country's power industry. Another big problem for a ravaged country.
This is for a country that has a collective memory of nuclear weapons. This is a disaster for the societal psyche, if you like, that these people will now have to live with this fear compounded by this accident.
Despite its history, Japan is the third largest nuclear power user in the world, behind the United States and France. For the last 4 decades, the country has made its nuclear energy program a national priority. But the industry has been dogged by controversy over safety, with some saying this catastrophe could easily have been avoided. The fundamental cause of the explosions was the failure of the backup generators that were meant to supply emergency power to the plant when it failed. They were drowned by the tsunami. If they'd been on higher ground, none of this would have happened.
These people now have to live with very similar reactors operated by the same people, under the same regulatory regime, directed by the same politicians. that caused or contributed or some way played part of this tragic accident that's occurred now.
The Japanese government says it has been and is still doing everything it can. Meanwhile, Britain's Foreign Office has reiterated its belief that there is, at the moment, no real threat to public health. But with the situation so uncertain, it's advising British nationals living in Tokyo and to the north to consider leaving the area.
I think I can take on Mother Nature and win. And that's clearly not the case here. I've been beaten. My fellow engineers and scientists have been beaten. My high-tech society has been beaten. Those who plan to expand our economies by use of things like hazardous plants, nuclear power, have been beaten. We have been thoroughly thrashed by Mother Nature in this particular example.
That kind of sentiment brings back memories of the tragedy of last year's Haitian earthquake, in which more than 200,000 lives were lost.
One of the biggest issues with earthquake disasters is what you do with the older buildings which weren't built to the latest design standards, or indeed in countries where they just don't apply the design standards at all. They don't have the economic and educational wherewithal to do so. One technique, for example, that we've been exploring is the concept of seismic wallpaper. One of the major problems in many earthquake-prone countries is that buildings are built out of reinforced concrete frames, and then the walls are built out of brickwork and masonry, and these walls can crack and fall out during an earthquake and kill people. We've been developing a very simple technique where we essentially use glass fibre wallpaper, stick that onto the walls using epoxy glue, and put it on just like you would put normal wallpaper. And we've done some physical tests on our shaking table with using full-scale walls with an example of one panel that was unreinforced and one that was reinforced with this simple glass fibre. They were both put through the same earthquake at the same time. The unreinforced wall cracked and collapsed within a few seconds, and tons of masonry coming down. But this very simple reinforced wall we were not able to damage.
Could these new techniques be part of the future, particularly for poor countries which are situated near fault lines? It's cheap and easy and could lead to a very significant improvement in the business of saving lives.
It looks like we're a little bit too late to get there.
I was in Haiti in the days after the earthquake last year, and it was clear that most of the people who died there never stood a chance. The same was true in northern Japan, but for different reasons. The survivors of Sendai talk of there being just 10 minutes from the sirens sounding to the tsunami reaching the shore. There was a desperate attempt to make it to higher ground. In their cars, some tried to outrun the wave, but the water was faster than them. Simon Safey was one of those I met, searching for bodies.
We tried the rescue mode, that's over. It's up to recovery now. So.
Have you seen anything like this? Describe it for me.
Oh, that's 4 today. Yeah, it's sad. It's sad.
And how does this compare with other disasters that you've worked in, sir?
I did the tsunami in Indonesia, but this is horrific. This is just horrific. God bless Tokyo. That's all I could say. Sorry, buddy.
In what sense, Simon? How do you...
Just God bless them, mate. Look at the disaster they're having. Just God bless them. This brings peace to people, at least. They find the bodies, the families find peace for their loved ones, so it's all done.
You said it's much worse than the tsunami. Why do you say that?
Oh, they're all the same. They're all worse. A death's a death. A loss is a loss.
Back in Tokyo, it's now 4 days after the quake. Julie Macken and her family are trying to carry on as normal, but it's an unnerving time, and she's considering their options.
People in the expat community have totally panicked, absolutely freaked. Everybody's gone. The school is shut. There's me and probably 5 people left, and one of them's leaving. So I'm seriously, I was on a travel agent this morning trying to book flights out of here, just because you're just not sure the information we're getting is correct. You know, all the news people are saying it's, you know, the world's just about to blow up, and yet the Japanese media are saying it's all fine, and you just don't know who to believe. And It's really scary, actually, yeah. We've read a few expert reports that essentially says, you know, the situation's under control, but what's difficult is what happens if there's another big earthquake now, you know, with an unstable nuclear reactor and an earthquake. It's not really a very good mixture.
Less than 24 hours later, and Julie's fears have grown again.
We'll give you a ring when we get to the airport.
Julie and Ross have decided that she should leave Japan with the children.
We're going back to England today. Yeah. Don't know if it's the right decision or not, but it's just that it's just got too scary here. The children are starting to could start to get affected by it. Yeah. Everybody else is left could. You quite like the aftershocks, don't you? There was a big earthquake again last night, which was just a bit freaky. Ross is staying. Probably the situation is safe. We've probably panicked, but it's just not worth taking a risk.
They'll catch the first train of the day to the airport, leaving the country that they have come to call home behind.
Japan's recovery from total defeat at the end of the Second World War to leading the world in technological development is one of the great stories of the 20th century. But since coming to Japan for the first time this week, I've learned that that's a lot more than just historical cliché. There's a real popular pride here in the fact that things work. The trains do run on time. And yet this is Shibuya Square in central Tokyo in the middle of Thursday morning rush hour. It would normally be packed with people, but so many are staying at home to stockpile food with the threat of radiation literally hanging in the air. This country has always lived with natural disaster, and I guess its people know that modern life, with all of its timetables and its comforts, is actually a very fragile thing.
There is, of course, too much at stake here for the struggle between man and nature to ever stop, and it is a contest that will continue to be measured in human lives, saved or lost.
As the tremors continue, the government here in Japan knows that the search for survivors must still go on. In just a few hours, the country will be marking the day a week ago